This is a intro to the month of April. Fourth month, we're going to just align the months with the 12 steps and think about the principles in those steps and relate them to the thinking problem, the mental obsession. And step 4, technically, is about courage. And let me also mention that principles are all the same thing. They're indivisible because they are completely united and they represent the nature of existence, not some human division. Because they are absolutely inviolable, immutable, indivisible. So what we've done is broken them down into thinking categories, just like scientists have broken the dimensions of space down into dimensions as though they're separate. All they've done is distinguish the characteristics of those dimensions, which are absolutely intimately interconnected with each other. And they are where we are right now, happening as they are in total without any exceptions. So principles are the same thing. So when I talk about principles, I'm offering the chance to look at our thinking in relation to these absolute states of being that are already our present state of awareness. They are now that, have always been, will always be. There is no exception to that because there is no divisibility in that, and there is no space or time in that realm. We talk about the fourth dimension as being space and time, but in fact, it's just a dimension amongst other dimensions that are infinite, that don't have the same quantitative here and there, now and then tendencies or proclivities or traits. Those are just things we function in because our body is designed to function in that realm. And yet the essence of who we are that is running our body is not from that realm or in that realm, limited to that realm. It's a realm of possibility that we exist in. So in the fourth step, it talks about courage. And I would suggest that when we are not thinking in ways that are impossible, making believe that we are the creators of reality and that the self we think we are is all we are, when it's really just born of thought, we're discouraged. And discouraged is not courage. We've actually taken courage and undermined it by disturbing, discomforting, discounting, depreciative thoughts, meaning thoughts with no basis in reality, thoughts simply with the basis in thought. So courage is natural. It's a natural product of being and awareness and knowing. There is no doubt in knowing in an absolute sense. Zero, none, ever. Can't be. Because it knows it knows. It's as simple as that. So something that knows it knows, just like you've had experiences where you just know you know something and somebody can say, how do you know? And you say, I don't know. I just know I know. There's a certainty to it that is not questionable. So the only reason we ask questions is because we're in doubt over something. And if we're asking questions from a doubtful standpoint within thought, we're relying on doubtful thought to look. And that's like having false thoughts and then using the false thoughts to look for the true self. It's not going to happen. You're going to find more and more about what's wrong, and it will confirm what you're doing in your thinking. So the other side of this when it comes to principles is that principles are not something we need to understand before they become real. Principles are real right now, whether we understand them or not. And beginning to consider this is beginning to relieve thought of the pressure of making believe that all it is reality and truth. And as a result, all we have to rely on. And that having to rely on it is the addiction, this idea that we have no other choice but to rely on thought exclusively, when it isn't the exclusive domain of knowledge or being or presence. It's a function of humanity. It's a function of what humans do, which is to think. And it's primary to human existence, primary to our ability to actually be useful and whole. Dysfunction would be a condition of being discouraged. If I'm working constantly to feel better about being discouraged, I'm going to dysfunction in all the ways I try and wonder why things keep getting worse and the world looks difficult, and life is impossible, and the universe is complicated. And none of those things are true. The universe is not complicated. It knows exactly what to do right now. And by the way, it is doing it right now for you to even be listening to this and for me to be speaking simultaneously. It's doing it. And wherever you are when you're listening to this, it's still doing what I'm suggesting now because it's always done what it does. And it will always do what it does until it doesn't do what it does anymore. If that time comes, I don't know. I'm not going to be the great predictor of what's to come. But I would say in an infinite source, nothing ever changes. And if the universe is constantly changing, then the infinite source is something that is not tangible and it isn't seemingly sensible. And yet it is an awareness that we must all have, not because it is demanded of us, but because it is the nature of existence. Period. It's simple. So we don't have to understand the universe to understand that it's doing what it's doing. And when we understand it's doing what it's doing and everything that's happening right now includes everything it's doing, which includes everything I am doing and everything you're doing, wherever you and I are, whenever you are listening to this, and whenever now I am speaking to this into this microphone, wherever you were then not hearing me now, you will be hearing me then at a time which will also be now, because nothing ever happens at any other time than the present, ever. There is no real time in reality and truth. We are living in a dimension of time that our bodies are designed to interact with. And part of how the absolute is recognized in that dimension of time is that everything that's changing, and thoughts, by the way, are always changing. Knowledge doesn't change. Absolute knowledge does not change because it knows everything. It doesn't have anything to think about. It doesn't have anything to question. It doesn't have anything to wonder because it's not uncertain. Doubt and disturbance come from thinking about things that aren't true and then thinking that they're true and thinking, now I got to manage this new problem that I basically created by instigating. So if we're experiencing a realm that seems limited, one of the things that isn't limited in it is that everything is changing all the time, which is absolute. The absolute nature of everything can be seen when everything is looked at in a unified way, meaning in total. So if everything that's changing in the universe is always changing, the one thing that isn't changing is that everything is changing. Now, if I look at any part or piece in it, that's going to be very hard to see and understand because the pieces are going to be seeming to change, and I'm going to try to keep them still and try to make believe that I can make them absolute and fixed to where they are, and I'm going to fight for them to be what I think they should be, and all of a sudden I again become the creator of reality, trying to mimic reality in my own thinking, which is insane. So insanity is very easy to produce. It's as simple as thinking about something that isn't true and then thinking that thing that isn't true is true. And now you're entertaining, you're listening to thoughts because the narrative of those thoughts will always be a conversation in your head. You'll be listening to a supposed self that apparently is separate from who you are to even be, I am talking to myself or I am thinking to myself, or is a suggestion that there's a self to talk to or think to, that's something distinct from I, me, the essence of us. And all of a sudden, those start to develop narratives that go on and on and on in our head. And we start to see images in our head about these narratives, making believe that we're stuck, for instance. And we repeat, I'm stuck, I'm stuck. Well, think of a foot being stuck or a car being stuck or all those things. They become narratives in our brain to justify that this is true because we can create this projection or this imagery in our head. But what that really does, if it's looked at accurately, is simply reveal how creative thought is to be able to imagine things. That's it. Creativity and imagination are all tied together. It's one of our greatest assets that's been turned into one of our greatest liabilities by using it incorrectly, by seeing it as something that's real and true, rather than seeing that it's literally imagination, giving us a chance to see all that's possible in the world and then interact with the world honestly so that we can begin to realize those things and take what exists in terms of present matter, because nobody ever creates anything in terms of matter. Nobody ever makes things. We talk about it because we talk about the sun coming up and down too, and it does not go up or down. We go around and around. And it appears that way to us. So we speak in those self-centered terms. We speak in terms according to how we see things rather than how things are. So this greater knowing awareness, as we're expressing it as a creative imagery, doesn't condemn us at all until we make believe it's true and real. And I would say that's irresponsible and insane, because that narrative that goes on in our head, we immediately begin to think is who we are, and our life depends on maintaining it, while we're actually putting the body's life at risk by undermining it with stress and anxiety and depression and all the other kind of fractured states of unhealthy imposition that stress and anxiety impose on our bodies. So the thing we're trying to do to save us is killing us. It's a good definition of addiction. Addiction's trying to feel better about what's wrong. And if we're relying on feeling, we're relying on a symptom, which is an effect, and we're ignoring the cause, which is the thinking. And if we can notice that the disturbances in our experience are telling us something's wrong, and what's wrong is what we're thinking about, now we have a chance to actually address the thinking part by simply acknowledging not the feeling is bad, but the thought is bad. So I'm going to take what basically courage is the basic principle, but also remind your ears that principles are not divided. They're all one thing. They're divided for our mental purposes because the division of our seeming experience seems divided, while in fact it's whole. So when we're thinking of these from a principled state, every one of these blends into one another. For instance, the first step is honesty. Well, honesty is acceptance. It's also willingness. It's also humility. Humility is letting things be as they are. Humility is typically step 7, but it's all built into step 1. So step 4, I'm going to also offer responsibility and accountability as really being fundamental to this idea of looking at ourselves accurately enough that we begin to notice the immorality and the instability and the immaturity of our thinking and start to honestly assess it sufficiently to simply look at the immediacy of the moment, our experience as we're having it. If we're reactive, if we're disturbed, if we're uncomfortable, those things are reflecting our thinking, not our reality. Not reality in any way, just a manifestation of thought. They're a consequence of thought. Our owner's manual, our bodily owner's manual, is actually giving us a guidance. It's a guidance system to help us learn how to interact with nature. And nature is principled. If you look at nature, trees do not argue with one another. There are animals that kill each other, but they kill each other for the benefit of the greater whole. And humans don't tend to act like that. They kill wholesale in the name of an individual's idea of what's good for the individual, not the whole. We claim it for the whole, but it isn't good for the whole if we're mass murdering people in some way or killing people in some way that isn't healthy in the name of thinking that it's good for us. Who cares what happens to them? That's not how nature works. Nature always gets better. Nature always develops in a direction of growth and stability. It always responds to what's happening. So responsibility is very different than reactivity. Reactivity is a reaction, an automatic knee-jerk attempt to pretend what's happening isn't happening because you're trying to feel better about what's worse. That's addiction. That makes things worse because the thinking continues to be maintained as though it isn't the problem. So what does it get? Worse. And why do we overdose? Because we keep trying to outrun that growing pain. Naturally. It's impossible and it's unnatural, but within the sickness, what's natural is unnatural and abnormal from sick thinking. So honesty is responsibility, and it is humility, and it is acceptance, and it is forgiveness, and responsibility and accountability. Accountability is where everything adds up. It balances. Good accounting balances books, balances inventories, balances math. That's what accounting is about. Double ledger. There's 2 sides because both of those sides need to add up to be sure that all the numbers involved are right. Now, the numbers that are put into those calculations may be wrong too. So we may be able to bring balance simply by looking at the present. We don't have to go back and address every single thing that ever went wrong and every single thing we ever did to start to account for what's happening now. And my experience, and many others who I've worked with, and I expect many others who I've never worked with or talked to, have found that if the immediacy of the moment is reckoned with accurately, rather than constantly fought and opposed and thought of as something that shouldn't be happening, then the immediacy of our experience stabilizes, and from that stability, decisions being made will be productive and useful and functional, rather than more desperate thoughts leading to more desperate thoughts and always wondering, why does this keep happening? Why does this keep going on? This seems impossible to overcome. It seems like an impossibility. Those feelings are witnessing our thinking, not our being nature at all. And yet, it's the clarity of our being nature, this absolute present state of awareness that we all share and have, that isn't an option, that isn't negotiable, that isn't something that comes and goes. You can't have more or less of it. Whatever it is, and whatever it is, we all have. It is our nature. If nature is nature, nature is our nature. Whatever that nature is, it includes everything, and everything beyond everything we can even imagine. Because in an absolute state, there are no limits. So any thought I have about that absolute state is going to be limited. It doesn't mean the thought's a problem. It simply means it's a problem when I think that it's the only thing happening. When I think it's true, I think it's unlimited. And if I'm having a thought that's limited and I think it's true, I'm thinking it's limited and unlimited at the same time. It's exactly what we do in the present, thinking that I shouldn't be here, or we shouldn't be here, that somehow I should be somewhere else with something else, or more or less of something else, and someone else. And when I get there, I'll be fine. But here, I'm not fine. The only place that is absolutely assured as being where I am in this addictive thinking is the one place I claim not to want to be. That is not a coincidence. It is a consequence of making believe our thinking is true and real and relying on it so solely that we're willing to ignore reality and truth. We're willing to stand as though we're apart from it in that kind of thinking. And it causes enormous, catastrophic consequences, as history has shown from the beginning of written history. So talking about this honestly and openly, even though I may not know where you are, I know right now you are exactly where you are. And if you're listening, I know you are listening. I don't have to see a face. I don't have to know any more than to know that people listening are doing what they're doing. And you know how I know that? Because I know that right now everybody's doing exactly what they're doing. Everybody, everywhere, and everything everywhere, and everywhere we can't even imagine isn't anywhere right now is happening. Because that's where the present is, where things happen, and we are happening with everything. Now, if everything isn't enough, it's a pretty clear indication we are trying to intercede with enough to make believe it's up to thinking to conclude what's enough and what isn't enough. And that's where addiction starts. So the simple resolution of being where you are, where we are, and noticing that everybody's already there. Everybody has this knowing nature, or nobody would have it. And one of the clarifying aspects of our thinking, when we're disturbed and when we're hurt, if we didn't have a greater sense of knowing, the idea about being hurt wouldn't be obvious to us. It would be natural, and we would feel pain as a natural consequence of life. We wouldn't even see it as a consequence. It would become the absolute reality of our existence, because there would be no reality beyond that. So disturbance and discomfort and dysfunction and failure and all that, we would celebrate all those things as being the high point in our experience. And I haven't found humans to do that. People do not come to me and ask to feel worse and or think more negative thoughts, which tells me there's a predisposition that is worse and negative, attempting to negate reality and truth, which includes everything positive, because the the atoms and the neutrons and the protons and the I'm forgetting the other one, but they're all operating on a basis of this interactive shared capacity. They're not operating on one half of it or part of it or an extreme part of one side of it. They're operating on the whole dynamic. And when we're not operating on that whole dynamic, we are lopsided and we're out of order and we are tilting, literally, unstable, doubtful, uncertain, depreciated in our own sense of value. And all that we're seeing in the depreciation and doubt is what we're thinking that is doubtful and depreciated, because it's not everything. It's just a thought, just a thought. So responsibility and accountability, where things add up, there's balance, are principles. And responsibility is different again than reactivity, which is an automatic attempt to defend, to get fed. The addiction, in almost any way, learns to use exclusively what's killing us in the name of thinking it's saving us. It's the same with the thinking. If I'm desperate and thinking from desperate thoughts, I'm going to create desperate thoughts, and I'm going to be in a cycle of desperate thoughts that seem new all the time because I'm not thinking the exact same thought, but I'm thinking it on the same basis of the same thought. It's just going to go around and around and around and around, and all of a sudden become something that has a life of its own and seems to attack me and be intrusive and hateful and all those things. And I would say the self-loathing and the self-hate is well-deserved for a being who is knowing in nature. To make believe that all it is what it thinks is a pretty hateful process and spiteful process and contemptful approach to existence. So that's what we're experiencing. So responsibility is the ability to respond. It includes consideration. This is about an awakened meditation. It's about noticing that knowing state is always aware, always aware. It is always a present meditative state. It's the one we think we're striving for while we already have it. But what we're really striving for and to is to introduce our thinking to our actual awareness rather than the thinking about thinking, so that thinking can start thinking. Thinking knows independent of that awareness. The insanity and the discomfort is coming from the idea that we need to be separate from everything and then wonder why we're alone and struggle with loneliness and seeming to be apart and alone in the universe. Those are frightening prospects to a being, a physical experience that we're having, this material seeming experience we're having, is frightened by that because I know it isn't true. I know it. And so when I introduce what I know to the self I think I am, I start to actually notice that self has been very shy and very wounded and very distraught for a long time. And that the voices that I have in my head have never been happy in the terms they speak to me. And if you listen to the thinking you do about yourself, you'll start noticing that the voices are generally not that happy. You've really got to induce them into some form of happiness that's really trying to overcome this underlying bit of happiness we make believe we're not doing. So to make believe we shouldn't be where we are is the same function of making believe we shouldn't be thinking what we're thinking, because it's so disturbing we think we can oppose it, which actually continues to maintain it. So our conversation is looking at this and doing our best. I don't know we've done great. I know we've done as well as we've done. And I know that it's a relatively new conversation in my life, so I don't think I'm very good at talking about it, but I've spent a lot of time developing it, and I'm standing a little closer to wanting to talk about it in ways that are more obvious and more prevalent and more available. And some of that means doing it in person. And it's sometimes causes I notice the fears that I have and the ideas I have that aren't true. They come up when I'm in the front. When I'm in facing more and more people, it becomes more obvious where my fears are. Just like when circumstances become a little daunting, it gives me a chance to begin to notice where a lot of those buried thoughts that I think I'm not having that aren't even buried. I just keep them in this place I call subconscious so that I can pretend they're not there. And I've done that so successfully for so long, and not actually successfully, but successfully in my own thinking imagination, that I don't think they're there. And yet they're imposing on me this inner conflict and this fear and this anxiety and stress I have about being with other people or being in circumstances that aren't quite what I thought should happen. When I think my thoughts are true and real, I think the only thing that should happen is what I originally thought. When it doesn't, everyone who's in my way that I see is screwing with me. And everything that's happening is threatening my life. It isn't true. The fact that I can think about my thinking does not create a self of who I am. It creates a thought thinking of itself. It's just more thinking that it's doing. It's not a bigger self. This whole idea of ego is just thinking, that the more I can think about my thinking, all of a sudden the ego gets bigger. Well, if the ego is considered an image of self, that is not who I am any more than I am the person in the mirror when I look in it. So I offer this as a precursor to Sunday's discussion, just something to think about and contemplate. And notice that you who are not directly involved in that conversation on Sunday, you may be, but if you're not directly involved, you're absolutely involved in the broader discussion, because your presence, wherever you go, has the possibility of being expressed in ways that you've never spoken to or thought of. As a result of not thinking of it, you don't talk about it. And the chance to begin to talk about it is not selling it to anybody, but speaking about your experience and any stability that you're starting to recognize and anything that you're becoming aware of that seems to catch you off guard, suggesting you're normally on guard, to give you the chance to speak about your experience in a way that might be very meaningful to other people. Because if I tell you, and you are not going to listen to anything I say if you don't want to. You're going to hear it the way you want to hear it. Obsessive thoughts tend to hear only what you think is being said, not what's actually being said. So the deeper, more profound aspect of this is not in the words I'm using, but in the knowing you already have. You already know it. So if you begin to lean in that direction and see that it's not my words, I'm just talking about it. I'm talking about it because it gives me greater ability to recognize the continuing dysfunction, discomfort, and limits I have in my own ability to express it. And I'd like to get better about this, because it seems to me that we have gotten really good at dysfunctional communication and dysfunctional interaction, and might use some natural, mature, ripening, sweetening of our experience, so we don't create reactivity in others by being reactive in our own tendencies. If I can come to terms with what's going on, I start to realize everybody already knows everything in terms of that greater sense. Doesn't mean that we've figured out everything that we can on Earth. I would say we're far from it, and would have enormous capacity unleashed of a sense of knowing that would be intuitive and immediately reflecting our greater sense of knowing, rather than this tit for tat pettiness that tends to happen between, even within science. Scientists have a collective, almost in every respect in human endeavors, their self-centeredness, trying to keep something away from somebody else so that somebody can get the credit for it, rather than think of it as something we're doing for everyone, and beginning to see that that glowing nature is our nature. It's already here. All we're doing is making believe it's what we're thinking that counts, and we need credit for it because we've been so discredited in our own experience for so long, constantly looking for credit undue. We don't discover anything in nature. All we do is realize ways to utilize it in ways that are aligned with nature. And much of what we've discovered has not aligned with nature at all. It's been completely contrary to it. It's a pollutant, the same contaminant in our thinking, the toxic thinking, ends up in the rivers and the oceans and the air. Because we're going to express it. We're going to follow that path. The seed is going to lead to the tree. The oak seed never leads to a walnut tree. Corrupt thoughts always lead to corruption. We have plenty of evidence of it, and it might be worth looking at and starting to think about and starting to notice each of our own culpability in that, because we each have one thing, which is a choice. And I can't tell you what that choice is. I can talk and I can talk and I can talk, and you're going to do with what I say what you want. And there's the freedom. And there is also the responsibility, because that's where choice lies. The choices you make are going to have an impact on you immediately. Karma does not take lifetimes to realize. We've just created that image so that we can excuse denial during the lives we're having and pretend that there's nothing we can do about it. Not true. We're given all possibility that is possible to be able to do every day, every single day. To squander that on ideas that aren't true is just to pass time and make believe that somehow we're uninspired and bored, and we need to stimulate life rather than notice life is pretty stimulating when you start looking at it accurately and realize that it's everywhere around us and in us and shared by everybody, not in some distinct, distinguishable, exceptional way, but in an absolute every moment, all people, all things now. So that's about it. Anyone with questions, interests, comments, etc., there's an email under the contact section, contact@mentalobsession.com, or I think it's maybe it's contact@mentalobsession.com. I don't email myself too much. And happy for the insight and the experience. My sense is that your participation is your reactions, your responses, what you experience in your body as you hear what you hear and how you deal with it starts to give you a chance to notice maybe there's something going on that you either normally don't pay attention to or are firmly aware of. And I would say that we all are. We just don't think we are because it wouldn't support the thinking that we've claimed represents who we think we are, our characteristics, our personality, and all that stuff. So principles aren't about personality. It's like anonymity. It's a faceless presence, something we all share. It's a presence we all share, and there are no faces in it. There are no personalities in it. There are no characters in it. There are no characteristics in it. It's just an essence of essence. It's ultimately love, as Dr. Bob talked about in the 12th step. Steps are based on principles. That means they're based on love. Love would be the ever-giving, generous, supportive, never taking, always just abundant, so abundant that it could, in the paradox is the idea of giving it away to keep it is interesting because that would normally not seem to be the case. But paradoxes are reversing, turning relative things into absolute things and starting to show that if we actually gave everything away, we'd have everything. And you know what? It's happening right now, and we already do. So hang with that thought and some of the others and mull them over. Write your thoughts down if you like. It tends to give a little perspective to what you're thinking, and it also gives those thoughts a place to live. So you may be able to notice some of the other thoughts that are a little bit quieter and a little subtler and a little less hyperactive than the ones consuming your immediate attention. Love you. My best. Every day, every moment. It's another day in a row today. Welcome to it.